Herzlich willkommen, wir freuen uns über Douglas Stuart in den Geistesblüten. Seine Romane Shuggie Bain und Young Mungo haben wir verschlungen. Ich glaube, Douglas ist ein Riesenfan von Armistead Maupin, der in seiner Romanreihe Tales of the City seit Ende der 1970er Stadtgeschichten über eine WG in San Francisco schreibt. Die Buchreihe wurde mit Olympia Dukakis und Laura Linney verfilmt. Ich bin Christian Dunker und neugierig, ob sich die beiden jemals getroffen haben.
Yeah, you know, he was a huge influence on me as a young man, but I had the great privilege of meeting him for the first time last year. We actually had dinner together. We were going to go celebrate a friend who was touring. And I mean, he's endlessly inspiring to me, both because of what he's done in terms of a crime journalist and as a novelist, and then just as a gay icon. And so I was at dinner sort of fangirling over him for the first bit, and he had no idea who I was, and it dawned on him about halfway through dinner who I was, and I was really touched to know that he'd read my work. I mean, that was... You know, I was kind of glad that he didn't know who I was for the first part, and then I was really pleased that he'd liked my novel.
Of course he did. I'm like, so did we. I'm like, I'm happy you're here. Toast to you, and like, there's a seat. And so let's talk.
Thanks for having me.
Douglas Stuart stammt aus einer Arbeiterfamilie in Glasgow. Er wuchs bei seiner alleinerziehenden Mutter auf, die sich zu Tode trank, da war er gerade mal 16. Danach kümmerte sich sein älterer Bruder um ihn. Am Royal College of Art in London studierte Douglas Mode, seit dem Jahrtausendwechsel lebt er in New York City. 2020 wurde sein Debütroman Shuggie Bain mit dem Booker-Preis ausgezeichnet. Bei den British Book Awards wurde der Roman sowohl zum Buch als auch zum Debüt des Jahres gekürt. Dass er den Roman überhaupt schreiben konnte, verdankt er den Erinnerungen an seine Mutter und ihren Kampf gegen die Sucht, offenbart Douglas in seiner Danksagung. Sein zweiter Roman, Young Mungo, war ein Sunday Times-Bestseller und ein Finalist für die Carnegie Medal. Auf LitHub veröffentlicht Douglas Essays über Geschlecht, Klasse und Konformität. Im New Yorker erscheinen seine Kurzgeschichten.
Looking at your face, you didn't pick up any German so far, and like, even though you've been to Berlin before, I deliberately just left a few gaps in your curriculum vitae, and as the same with your novels, I didn't reveal everything here. That's what you're here for, and so I want to talk to you about it. Before your success as a writer, you worked as a fashion designer for labels such as Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein. Do you still design fashion?
No, I don't. I mean, I wish in a way, I wish I had some kind of artistic practice that I could do sort of creatively with my hands and drawing and designing, because I think actually I write better when I'm also distracting my brain sometimes. And in fact, my route into fashion was textiles. So of all the things in the world, I'm a knitter. I have 2 degrees in learning how to knit. And so I like the sort of the slow, repetitive work of textiles when I'm thinking about my writing, because it's almost meditative for me. But no, I don't think I could go back to fashion now. I had 25 years working for large brands and designing menswear primarily for them, and I feel like I achieved everything I wanted to, and I was waiting so long in my life to emerge as a writer. You know, I'd been writing my whole life while working in fashion, and now that I feel like I've had a foot in the door, there's no way I would turn back.
I don't want to lose you off the hook right here, because like I just mentioned Calvin Klein, for instance, and like so like to us men it's basically underpants, but I can't talk about underpants to you like for all day. Just a few minutes ago you walked down the Geistesblüten catwalk, so do you enjoy lots of eyes on you, or are you rather bashful? What do you like?
Yeah, I've always been really shy. I mean, I think I perform quite well as an extrovert, but most definitely I'm an introvert. And I had a really lonely childhood. That was something that started when I was a kid, mostly because I was gay and I was queer in a very sort of macho place, but also because we had problems at home with addiction and other things. And so I had a very sort of isolated childhood, and that continued up through my adolescence and as a young man. And I quite like that. I quite like being by myself. I like time to think and to be creative. And, you know, I'm always the first person to leave a party, and I'm always the last person to get there because I just don't want to go. And so, yeah, so I'm just naturally quite a shy person.
Mentioning your family, set pieces of your novels match your own key data. For example, you come from a working class family, you're a gay man, you grew up in Glasgow with your single mother. Later on, your older brother looked after you. Was he the first person to show off your assets to?
Yeah, my brother is a wonderful man, and I think, you know, a lot of what my work is about is, as you said, I was raised by a single mother, but a lot of what my work is about is how families function when the structure isn't traditional. Perhaps there's a single parent, or perhaps there's parents who are failing, and that pushes siblings into unwanted roles in a life as a parent or as a caregiver themselves. And I love that dynamic in fiction. I love that people assuming these very quietly heroic roles. And my own brother in my own life was very quietly heroic. You know, he's a carpenter, he was a working man, and he also never wanted to have to raise a younger brother, and he did that. And I certainly was struggling with my masculinity, whereas my brother wasn't struggling with his, but he understood the very narrow codes of a very masculine world, because Glasgow is a big industrial town, and men are often defined by the jobs that they did. And so to suddenly say that you wanted to do fashion or knitwear or writing was actually in itself very effeminate. And so my brother was always my protector and my encourager.
Today you can have your DNA examined. Somewhere I picked up that you don't know your biological father. Have you ever tried to find him? Because like this question came up because I talked to Dani Shapiro. You might have read her book. She asked for her father, like sending in her DNA also. Did you send in your DNA?
No, I would never do that. I didn't know my father because he left when I was about 4 years old, but I know that he died when I was about 11, and I hadn't seen him between the ages of 4 and 11. And I'm quite content with that conclusion, I think. In many ways, I was a very lucky young gay man to have been raised by women, to have been raised in this sort of female matriarchy, in this female household. And so I felt very lucky and very nurtured by that. And I don't feel any absence of a father at all. But it's good and really useful for my fiction, because I also think about the world as it was socially at that time, where fathers could just up and leave their children and their wives and never look back. And I think that's a really sort of fertile place to think about fiction. What a weird what a weird moral compass you must have, and what a weird sort of sexual politic world that you must inhabit, that you think that is okay.
By now, everybody wants to know about your books. Like the people who haven't read them yet, I advise them they're better off to get them, and because like I really like them both, and they're called Shuggie Bain and Young Mungo. And for everybody watching who might not have read them to now, I will just briefly summarize them. I do this in German, and maybe to improve your German. And like, so starting off with Shuggie Bain. Der Roman heißt nach der Hauptfigur Shuggie Bain, der ja eigentlich Hugh heißt und in der Thatcher-Ära spielt, also in den 80er Jahren in Glasgow in Schottland. Die Arbeitslosigkeit ist hoch. Shuggie und seine beiden Geschwister wohnen bei ihrer Mutter Agnes. Der Junge vergöttert seine Mutter, die ihr Bestes gibt, aber Agnes trinkt. Sie erhofft sich ein besseres Leben. Sie träumt von einem Haus mit eigener Eingangstür, während sie die Seiten des Freeman-Katalogs durchblättert. Alles, was sie darin sieht und was ihr Leben aufbessern könnte, müsste sie auf Kredit bestellen. Agnes ist mit einem anderen Mann verheiratet. Dieser Mann ist Taxifahrer. Agnes' Make-up und ihre perlweißen falschen Zähne lassen sie aussehen wie Elizabeth Taylor, nur dass sie in Glasgow lebt. Den Löwenanteil der wöchentlichen Sozialhilfe investiert sie in extra starkes Lagerbier. Die Dosen versteckt sie in ihrer Handtasche. Agnes' ältere Kinder wollen aus all dem raus. Sie kümmern sich vor allem um sich selbst, und Shuggie ist anders. Einerseits bemüht er sich darum, dass es seiner Mutter Agnes besser geht, aber er will auch nicht, dass andere erkennen, dass er anders ist als viele. And before I will summarize Young Mungo also, I'll just look at your face, and there are some words you picked up, of course, and you picked up Elizabeth Taylor. Yes. And so why did you like Agnes to look like Elizabeth Taylor?
You know, Elizabeth Taylor was a little bit of a class device for me, because Agnes is a character. She's the mother of this family, but she's a very bold woman. She's beautiful, she's a little brash, she has a grandeur to her. But she models herself on Elizabeth Taylor. But the thing about Elizabeth Taylor is she was a very difficult woman for the time. She liked glamour, she liked to drink, she liked to party. She often operated outside of societal norms, and she was celebrated for it. And yet Agnes almost tries to do the same thing in her life, but because she's a working class mother, she's actually vilified for it. And it's one of the ways that class can liberate people or hold them back. And so I wanted her to model herself on this really iconic woman who, in many ways, so many women idolized, but then could not sort of mimic in their own lives. You know, Elizabeth Taylor was married 7 times, and yet Agnes has 2 failed marriages, and that leads her to be excluded by the small, very tight Catholic community that she's a part of. You know, she takes an oversized pride in her appearance, and that causes her to be the enemy of the women around her. It creates a lot of animosity in her life. And yet all she really wants is for things to be brighter and more beautiful and more hopeful than they are. And yet she's not going to be allowed that dream.
But there is a second movie of yours. It's called Young Mungo, and again, it's called because of the main character. Young Mungo erzählt die Geschichte des 15-jährigen Mungo. Er wächst in den 90er Jahren in Glasgow auf. Er ist klein und wird als verweichlicht wahrgenommen, was ihn zur Zielscheibe von Tyrannen und gelegentlich auch von seinem eigenen Bruder Hamish macht. Er lebt mit seiner Mutter in einer Siedlung auf der protestantischen Seite und versucht mit seiner Sexualität umzugehen. Seine Mutter schickt ihn zu 2 Männern aus ihrer Gruppe der anonymen Alkoholiker, die versprechen, ihn zu erziehen, und die Mutter hat gar keine Ahnung, wem sie ihr Kind da in Wirklichkeit anvertraut. Was Mungo dort widerfährt, zwingt ihn dazu, sich zu wehren. As mentioned, Shuggie Bain is also about alcohol addiction, same with Elizabeth Taylor. How do you feel about alcohol yourself? Do you drink? I didn't dare to offer you a drink, so we...
So 11 o'clock in the morning, yeah. Yeah, I drink, I love to drink. I mean, I like to drink socially. I don't have any problem myself with alcohol, but I grew up in a place where it was a societal problem. You know, it wasn't just one family or one house on one street that was suffering. It was often a reaction to the mass unemployment that came through the region that I grew up in. I mean, under Thatcher, all industry closed in Glasgow, from steel to shipbuilding to coal to chemical manufacturing. And what happened is men and women found themselves out of work, and it was about, in the east end of Glasgow, the town that I'm from, the unemployment rate was about 27%, and it stayed there for all of my childhood, for most of my childhood. And so people turned to other ways to escape, to medicate, to manage stress, to manage their feelings of hopelessness. And so alcohol and addiction became a thing in my small community that not only my family suffered from, but the families around me. And that's why it keeps recurring in my novels. It's not just the story of one family, it's the story of a community. And as I create these novels that are tapestries of a time, and try to answer a lot of the silence that is around that. Because when you're working class and you're queer, people don't want to know that story. They know it's, it's a difficult story. When there's addiction there, they also don't want to know. When a woman fails, when a mother is failing, society generally turns away. They generally don't quite look. And so my novels are often about answering that silence, about saying, look, these lives are here and they have dignity and humor and love and strength. And this is what it looks like.
Hopefully you're addicted to chocolate as I am, because I got a box of soft chocolate in front of you. Maybe you want to open it and grab into it, because
You know, I do have a real, look at those are amazing. I have a real sweet tooth. Those are incredible. These look like they came from Paris.
No, try them.
Oh, do you just want to see, is this one of those videos where you see people do fetish things for people who like watching men eat?
Yes, and about this time of the day it's chocolate only. I'm like, next film is later.
Yeah, exactly. But actually it makes me think of Glasgow chocolate, because we imported a lot of sugar from America and the West Indies. Actually, Glasgow loves sugar because we are a big port town, and we would import a lot of sort of rum and tobacco and sugar from the West Indies. And so the city has a real sweet tooth, which I love about it.
I'm addicted to chocolate myself. What hit my eye on my ears was when you said people don't only want to read about class or working class problems and about sexuality. Have you ever been discriminated because of your sexuality or your origin?
Oh yeah, I mean, constantly. I mean, that's not just also in my hometown, but I also discriminated anywhere I go in the world. you know, my sexuality, sometimes I lapse into these positions where I think the world is better and we have moved forward entirely, and then you look at what's happening in the election in America, and I start to feel now as an American citizen that my rights are very much under threat, that if they can roll back women's reproductive rights in the way they have, it won't be very long before they come for my marriage of 30 years. And so I feel that I still feel that discrimination. And in fact, in my fiction, one of the interesting things of the past 5 years for me has been oftentimes younger gay people are looking for very happy, positive, future-forward queer stories, and they don't want to always be involved with you know, the bigotry and the hate and the violence that would come with queer stories of my generation. And so they would look at me and they'd say, why can't you write, you know, a happy story? They want something very optimistic. And I think it's essential that as queer people, we don't erase any of our history, that we always look at the trauma, we always look at what other generations have gone through so that we don't fall into the same traps, so it doesn't happen to us again in the future. And I also think that sometimes we think progress comes to the queer community, but it often comes to middle class or urban dwelling queer people, and it leaves people who are maybe rural or working class behind. There's a lag. I don't think all the progress that's happened in New York City has happened also in the Bronx. We know that trans people are still under threat. And so I think as a community, we have to remember that the progress that we see might not be happening everywhere at the same time. Not all boats are rising at the same speed. And so it's important that we remain vigilant against that. The reason I wrote Young Mungo was to answer a question inside myself. It's a story about two working class queer boys in Glasgow in the 1990s. And I'm a huge reader, but everything I read in the queer canon felt like it was middle class or upper middle class. It took place in a boarding school or a stately home or in a big urban centre like London or Paris, where people had a sense of mobility. And I wanted to write a book that was just about two very honest working class boys who couldn't leave where they were. They belonged in this city, in this part of the city, and that was their entire universe. And the reason, in fact, I called it Young Mungo was because Mungo is the saint of Glasgow. And when I was thinking about the character, I was thinking I wanted to call him something that belongs so much to the city that he couldn't be anyone else or anywhere else. And I thought, what could it be? Is it David or Andrew or what is it? And I thought, no, I'm going to name him after the patron saint. In fact, very few people are named after the patron saint. It's not a common thing at all. But what I was saying is these stories have always been in the city. Young gay men have always had to hide and conceal themselves and search for love and face sometimes extreme violence. And so by naming him after the patron saint, I wanted to make the city and these young working class lives interconnected in a way that couldn't be erased.
The two of us, we belong to the generation who witnessed the AIDS generation and the AIDS era, and like when we were like teen boys, it seemed there were only a few queers in the village or in the city, but now times changed, and as you said, the younger ones, they long for more optimistic stories. And do you believe they're more naive? It's because they haven't witnessed such eras like the AIDS era, and maybe they haven't been accused of anything they didn't do themselves.
Yeah, I think oftentimes they're born into a world that's more accepting, and they don't feel quite either the sort of the second-class citizenship that we felt as young men, or the impending doom that AIDS and disease really gave us in our generation. And so I think it's important that we're always just keep those in mind and we keep those stories alive. And especially, as I said, because I think those stories, but told from a place of poverty or working class or inner city urban lives, are often not the ones that are told. They're not the ones that go through academia. They're not the ones that travel in bourgeois circles. They're not the ones that make it to Paris and New York. And so for me, I take a great pleasure in uncovering those and sort of documenting them. It's important for me. Especially because I think our rights are always under threat, and certainly now as an American I feel it, and with the right-wing swing in Europe as well, you must also feel it. I don't think we can ever take anything for granted, and so just making yourself as aware as possible is essential.
Mungo's older brother Hamish, he's a leader of the pack, and like he runs his own gang, and he even asked Mungo to be part of it. and he really talks him into beating up other guys, like to prove his masculinity to everybody. Is this very Glasgow? Is this very New York? Is this like I've never been asked to beat up somebody else.
Well, the day is young. We could go out later and form a small gang. I don't think it's especially only Glasgow. I think any sort of urban environment, whether it's LA or New York, asks men to identify themselves, asks poor men who grow up on a housing scheme to identify themselves as a tribe. One of the things that was interesting about Glasgow is it's so close to Belfast, and we have such cross immigration between Scottish Protestants going to Northern Ireland and Irish Catholics coming to Glasgow, that often the city felt some kind of sectarian divide between Catholics and Protestants. And what was inspiring to me is I grew up in a family where my father was Protestant, my mother was Catholic, but the family felt that divide. And then in a community, our neighbours or the people who lived on the street next to us were socio-economically identical, but as young men we were separated into a Protestant education and a Catholic education. And so we were kind of separated even in a place where we were the same Christian people, that often our dads did the same jobs. And as you become young men, that sort of need to identify yourself and know where you belong and what side you're on becomes everything. And so we would often fight on a Saturday night. The irony for me is I would fight on the side of the Protestants, except I was raised by a Catholic single mother. So in essence, I was actually Catholic. But what was strange is it meant nothing to anybody, really, you know. So you think it's a very deep thing, and at the same time, it's not that deep at all. And I think with the violence in the novel, although it is about sort of reputation and defending yourself, one of the things that we overlook is violence is also sometimes quite fun for young men. It is a recreational thing, and when you have a team of boys who are Protestant and a team of boys who are Catholic coming and having a pitched battle, they are enjoying it on some level because it allows them to build reputation and to stitch themselves into myth in a way that maybe their lives wouldn't otherwise be recorded. And so it's a very sort of perverse thing, but it's not all just about violence. It's also about building fraternities, it's about building reputations, it's about building sexual allure. If you're a good fighter, more girls will want to sleep with you, you know, and you'll be the tough guy on the scheme. And so it's a fascinating, fertile thing for me.
Sexuality, class, and conformity are the big themes of Douglas Stuart, and you've published a variety of essays on LitHub only. Will they be published as a book also? Because we haven't read them in German so far.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think of myself as a non-fiction writer, in fact. I think of myself as purely a fiction writer. And so my essay...
Do you want to be a male Susan Sontag?
No, I don't. I want to, I don't know what I want to be. I want to just be a version of Douglas Stuart, just be the best version of myself. But no, I think fiction allows me to, I really like being able to look at things from different points of view. One of the things about Shuggie and Mungo that I try to do is to allow this almost polyphonic voice into my novel that allows you to look at how a mother feels, how a son feels, how an older son feels. Because I think the problems we often share are societal, and when someone is hurting and they're acting poorly, it's because something also has come into their life to form them in that way. And so I like to try and make it as rich a tapestry as I can. And fiction allows me to do that. It allows me to possess all these voices and to also bring them and make them meet in a place where there is the most hurt and the most tension, and also the most love and tenacity. And so I don't think my essays will ever be published in a broader sense. But hopefully I'll write more short stories that will also get to the same point of view, but just told through the lens of fiction.
So how far along is the film adaptation of your novels?
Very far along, meaning very far away, I should clarify. Yeah, it's been, because I'm adapting them myself, and so it's been an interesting exercise for me, because I both have the desire to tell the story as faithfully as I can to the novel, but also not to bore myself, and so it has to be some kind of creative exercise that keeps this writer's mind ticking over. And of course, when you change the medium from a novel to a screen, the story, although the story stays the same, the way you tell it has to change altogether. And so right now I'm just enjoying the process of development, and I feel like Shuggie and Mungo are not zeitgeisty things. They sort of exist outside time because they're not exactly of the moment. So I don't feel any rush to to make them happen now and today. So I'm trying to just enjoy the process.
But I assume you go to movies once in a while yourself. And did you watch Queer yet, starring Daniel Craig and Drew Starkey? And did you like the movie?
I did, very much. Actually, I went to the New York premiere of it, and I had this wonderful experience where I was sitting next to Hilton Halls, and the whole time I was just thinking, that's Hilton Halls right there. And so, yeah, I did. I found the first 20 minutes of the film really powerful, where the character of Burroughs is essentially publicly debasing himself to catch the eye and the love of the younger man. And so I did. I loved it.
Did it surprise you that Daniel Craig took over this role?
No, I don't think so. I think what is surprising is that we've forgotten what a phenomenal actor Daniel Craig is. I think perhaps when you become a superhero or a hero, we forget actually the range of this actor. And when I think about Daniel Craig, I actually think about Love is the Devil. I think about the Francis Bacon biopic and how powerful that is. And he's a phenomenal actor.
For many fans of William S. Burroughs, Queer remains a mystery to this day. The autobiographical novel describes Burroughs' trip to Mexico in the early 50s. The text was not published until 30 years later. Many of those who danced through this novel have a treatise today. So nevertheless, many viewers and readers still feel offended by Queer. And Burroughs outed himself with this text as if it were carved in the stone. He's been dead for more than 25 years by now. What do you believe? Is William S. Burroughs' novel Queer still influential today?
It is. It's been many years since I've read it. I can't recall the book, but the film, because I saw it a couple of weeks ago, it's really fresh in my mind. I think what I like most about it is how unapologetically queer it is, and how, the character of Burroughs doesn't hide in the shadows. He goes out and chases his desire and looks to find it, whether his desire is through his sexuality or through drugs, and expanding his consciousness. And that's what I like about it. It's not a thing that is done in the shadows. It's kind of exuberant in its telling of it, which I thought was really sort of revolutionary for its time.
In the movie, Daniel Craig, alias Lee, falls in love with the Marine Eugene Allerton, played by Drew Starkey. You can't set the temperature any higher in any movie, but then Omar Apollo gets involved too. And do you think such threesomes can still ruin a career today?
I don't know, but that's a risk I'd like to take if that ever comes around now. I don't know if the threesomes can ruin careers, but all the actors in it do a superb job.
So take a guess. Do you believe next James Bond to be gay, black, or a woman?
Oh, gay, black, or a woman, the next James Bond. Just to be very selfish, wouldn't it be wonderful if you really... There's always been sort of like hints of other sexuality with James Bond. He's sort of alluded to it. I think about that wonderful chemistry he had with Javier Bardem, Daniel Craig and Javier Bardem. And so I'd like to see him lean slightly more into his queerness.
So let's talk about your own setting again. Donald Trump is not very popular in New York, but this is your hometown right now. What a bummer. There's not so much on his political agenda for LGBTIQ and other minorities. Do you feel it's time to move back to Glasgow?
I made this huge mistake of falling in love with an American who never wants to leave New York, and so I feel very anchored there. You say Donald Trump isn't very popular in New York, but it was heartbreaking to see his popularity rise in New York. And I think that comes back to a lot of conversations we're having about ignoring the everyday concerns of most people, as the Democratic Party did. I would love to move back to Glasgow, but I think right now I feel very lucky to be a New Yorker.
You're married to a New Yorker for more than 30 years. So will you tell us your own love story in your next book? Will your next book take place in New York?
I might be too close to it to tell it. Maybe that's it. I would like to. I am working my way towards writing about New York. It's a very strange thing because I think people think of me as a British writer, but in truth I've lived in New York more than half my life, and so actually I'm an American writer as much as anything. But right now, I'm still sort of wrestling with my feelings about my homeland and about queerness there. And you'd said that my work is about all these different things, but actually, fundamentally, my work is about belonging. It's about trying to find out where my characters belong within a family, a community, and a country. And I think that's because I'm asking those questions of myself. I still can't figure that out. And so I think my next book might be about Scotland, and then hopefully beyond then, I'll get to America.
Thank you so much for this interview, Douglas. It was fun talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a great way to spend a gloomy January day. Thank you.